It's working. Mathematics errors. Well, in a forecast, of course you make mathematics errors. It just happens. So when you're looking through a forecast, you're scanning through it, and it says rent $10 million. And you think, wait a minute, that's not right. Something must have multiplied wrong. And you fix it. But you have to have your mind in a particular frame, kind of a relaxed analytic mood, to be able to spot those mathematics mistakes. They could be anywhere in your forecast. Or maybe a formula that you're using in your forecast is not correct. For instance, you said that the cost of the machinery that you're going to be selling to contracting companies, for example, is 40% of the selling price. So your cost is 40% of the selling price. And that's your forecast. But it turns out that it's actually 45%. You better change your forecast. That's a mistake. Because that kind of error repeats all the way across every month. So you need to keep an eye out for a formula like the wrong percentage. Inventory. I don't know what it is about inventory, but entrepreneurs have trouble with it. And let's imagine a shoe store, because that's very easy to picture. The shoe store has the beautiful displays in the front, and what's in the back room? The inventory. So when you go to buy the shoes, the salesperson goes in the back room and finds a pair. And you have no idea how many shoes are back there. You can't see that. So for some reason, when entrepreneurs are doing forecasts, they often forget to put the cost of the initial inventory, the inventory that's in the back room when they first open the doors. For some reason, they just don't put that in the forecast. It's an error on their part, but they pay for it. They write the check to pay for it. And guess what? Their bank account's empty when they open the doors. And that's a problem. The other thing that happens with inventory, and if you are thinking of a business that has inventory, you should listen to this, is that sales start to go up, just like you hoped. Oh, it's so wonderful. Our sales are rising every month. Well, chances are that your inventory has to rise a little bit too, otherwise you're going to run out of shoes. And people will come in and you won't have their size. So there's two mistakes with inventory: the initial inventory, and the added inventory. Okay, then there's the next thing. And this is one that some of you may have friends who have experienced this. Underestimating cost. Why is it that all of us business people believe in our hearts that the cost for opening our business, for our computer and our fixtures and hiring employees and all that we are going to do it for less than everyone else? We all believe that. Well, it's not true. If you do that, you are underestimating the cost, and guess what will happen? I'm not going to show you that video again, but you will run out of money. So how do you find out if you have underestimated? You do a little more research, you ask more people. It's not that hard. Then there's overestimating sales. I can assure you that every single entrepreneur on the planet overestimates what their sales are going to be. It's because to be an entrepreneur, you have to be optimistic, and unfortunately, that manifests itself in your sales projection. There are two problems that happen. One is you'll project that you're going to sell more than you will, and the other is that you will say that you're going to start selling on the first day, and that won't happen, because sales are always delayed. There's another one that's a little more technical. It's called accounts receivable. In the Gulf, a lot of business is done on what we call a cash basis. You pay for the goods when you get them. But not all of the business is done that way. And in the United States, a lot of business is done where in a manner in which you can pay later. I'm not talking about retail stores. Retail stores, you use a credit card, you pay with cash. There are no amounts that are owed to you by your customers. But in the wholesale business and in the construction business, your customers owe you money. They have given you a deposit maybe, but they still owe you some more money. And you expect to get that money as agreed upon in 15 days or 30 days or whatever it is. In the forecast, if you look at a forecast and it's for a construction company or a wholesaler or a distributor or a manufacturer, and there are no amounts owed the business by its customers, that forecast is wrong. So this is a problem. The amounts that your customers might owe you is an issue. It is also an issue, by the way, for those of you who are going to be consultants, like you're going to install computers in offices or you're going to do social network consulting. Your customers are going to owe you money also. Inaccurate research, this is just a general category for you make a mistake in the cost of anything that your company needs. And the way to fix inaccurate research when you're reviewing your forecast is to, again, do a little more research. Frankly, these are the 7 most common errors that I see in forecasts. I see a lot of them, a lot of forecasts, that is. And in my mind, when somebody hands me the forecast for their business, this is what's going through my mind. I'm looking for those things. So, last thing about this, the right forecast, is so you've done your forecast, you have reviewed it, you're ready to start your business, and you take the forecast and you put it in a file and you put it in the drawer and you never look at it again, do you? And that would be wrong, because the forecast needs to be updated every month, and it's a real pain in the neck. You don't want to do it, but you have to keep doing it because you learn every month, especially in the first year of business. I told you the story about the forecasting tea. We were wrong, so we changed it. So the next forecast, much better, much more accurate. And if you keep forecasting every month, you will find that you don't run out of money, that your bank loves you, your employees get paid on time, everything's just swell. So in this section, we have learned only a few things. Know the common mistakes so you can find them really quickly when you're doing a forecast. Make educated guesses, not wild guesses. Do a startup budget. Try to estimate what it's going to cost to start the business. And review your forecast, I said quarterly, it could be monthly, and revise it. Don't just put it in the drawer and forget it forever. So we can't take a break because we're still in the race of a business here, and we come to another hurdle. They just won't stop. And this one is called the right types of alternative funding. Well, I'd say it's pretty, well, let me say something else first here. Tomorrow's speaker is Steve Wozniak. This is a man who is famous, especially in the United States, for his contribution to the early days of Apple Computer. And one of the reasons that Steve was able to make contributions like he did is that he's an extremely creative thinker. He's very insightful. And I want you to be a creative thinker about the funding of your company. So it's common knowledge that you can fund a company with your own money, your family's money, maybe money from a bank, maybe a grant from the government. You know, I'm not going to take your time to go through those things. Those are things that if you don't know about them, you can find out about them much more easily. I want to talk about alternative funding sources. So the reason to get interested in these alternative sources is that it reduces the amount of money you need from investors and from a bank. Kind of worthwhile, I'd say. So we have alternative sources of funding. Well, the first one is government programs. If the government's not loaning you the money, but instead they're giving it to you, or almost giving it to you, then that's an alternative source of funding. And it would reduce the amount of money you would need from your family and investors and a bank. You can postpone purchases. We did that at Starbucks. In 1971, when we opened, do you remember I said that we weren't roasting our coffee right away? We waited until actually the spring of 1972 to begin roasting. Boy, was that a good idea, because setting up the roasting plant was kind of expensive. And by postponing, we actually had accumulated some profit from selling coffee, and by postponing, we saved spending money that we would have had to have gotten from a bank or investors. You can grow more slowly. Okay, did Starbucks ever grow slowly? Yeah, Starbucks did grow slowly. It grew kind of slowly in its first 10 years. We, as I mentioned earlier, started servicing restaurants. That was easy because you didn't have to build a store to service a restaurant. You just started delivering to them. But we also grew slowly, and we added about a store every 18 months. That's not very fast. I think Starbucks now adds a store about every 18 hours. And by growing slowly, something really wonderful happened. In 1980, I mentioned that we were already pretty successful in our city. In 1980, I and Jerry Baldwin and Gordon Bowker owned almost the entire company. And one of the reasons we owned almost the entire company is that we didn't have very many investors. And I think that one of the reasons we didn't have very many investors is that we grew slowly. Instead of trying to grow quickly, which would have cost a lot of money, we used profits to grow stores. Now, some of you are thinking, and the younger you are, the more you're thinking this, yeah, but some opportunities, you have to move really quickly. That's true. And when you have one of those opportunities, if you don't move quickly, if it's really true that it's what we call a time-sensitive opportunity, if you have one of those opportunities, you have to move quickly, but it might require that you get more money. Here's one that people don't think of. Always amazes me that they don't think of it. Prepayment from customers. Okay, you're going to open a restaurant? Great. While the interior and the kitchen is being built, I have a good idea for you. Why don't you go out and talk to people and get them to schedule banquets in your restaurant? Hey, what a great idea. Oh yeah, you're going to ask them for a deposit, a prepayment. Well, when you get those prepayments, that's cash in your hand, you put it in the bank, and that's less money that you need to get from investors or any other source. And how are you going to get people to give you a prepayment? Well, you give them something. Well, what do they want? A discount. Or maybe they want a Saturday night banquet, and Saturday nights are real special in your restaurant. So you say, for you, a Saturday night banquet's okay, but you just have to give me a deposit. Those kinds of things. Deposits are extremely useful because you get the money in advance, so you need less cash. Here's one that I'm not sure works here. I'm going to show you. It's called free rent. Where I live, if a landlord really wants you to rent his warehouse, and you're willing to sign a lease, like a 3-year lease, the landlord, if they really want you, they might give you some free rent, sometimes 3 months of free rent, as an inducement to sign the lease. And free rent, we love free rent because it's thousands of dollars that you don't have to get from investors or a bank. It's thousands of dollars in alternative funding. Trades and exchanges. You're really good at installing computer systems and installing software so that, let's say, attorneys, lawyers, it's special software for lawyers, and you know all about it, that when you install it, it works. Okay, so lawyers are really interested in you. And it turns out that you need a lawyer. You have some papers that have to be filed with the government, or you need the services of a lawyer. Why don't you just swap services? Because if you do that, especially if you do it when you're first starting your business, you won't need the money that you would have paid him. That's alternative funding. You just eliminated a lot of money, if it's an attorney, that you won't have to pay. So that's trading or exchanging. It can also work with machinery. You have a piece of equipment that's in a storage unit somewhere in Kuwait City. You have a friend that has something that you want. Why don't you just swap equipment? Then you won't have to buy something. And finally, we have do it yourself. Now, this is better for those of you who are over 50 years old and you're thinking about starting a company. I don't know if this applies to you, but for young people like I was when we started Starbucks, do it yourself is fairly useful. So here's do it yourself. You do some work that you would have to pay somebody else to do, work that needs to be done before your company can be open for business. And maybe it's not fun work. So I'm going to show you a picture. This is a picture probably never before seen by a public audience. It was taken in 1971 in about January. Starbucks opened in March of that year, 2 months later. That's what do-it-yourself looks like. I'm on the left, Jerry Baldwin, who still had his mustache then, and Gordon Bowker with a shaggy beard. Guess who built the fixtures and painted the interior of the first store that we built? These three guys, our friends and our family. Everybody helped. And that was like alternative funding. We did not need as much money because we did these things. Now, let's go on to, so we're talking about alternative funding, which works like free money. And we're going to review quickly here. You can use government incentives, especially if it's a grant. Postpone purchases, yeah, you can do that. You can grow a little more slowly if that's possible, if the opportunity is not going to go away. You can ask for prepayment from customers. That's one I really love. And you won't know if they'll do it until you ask them, right? You can sometimes get some free rent. That saves a lot of money. You can trade or exchange. That saves a lot of money. And you can do it yourself. Saves a lot of money. So where are you going to get your money? And I'm not talking about whether it's from a bank. I'm talking about the people you're going to get the money from. And I'm going to tell you a story that is a true story that I'm very proud of. So who are you going to get your money from? Well, let's imagine a situation here. You're talking to two people that you know who said, yeah, we'll help you get that business going. We think you're pretty good. We appreciate all the hard work you've done. We love you, or we've known you since you were a child. We trust you. So it's interesting. The two people you're talking to, they both have the money. That is, they each have the money that you need. That's good. But one of them, you're starting to notice that one of them has a bunch of friends who might be your customers. And if he invests, those people are going to become your customers for sure, because he's going to tell them to buy from you, whatever you're selling. So the question is, which investor do you choose? So I have a story for you that happened in 2013, this year. The story started in February. I introduced two men that I know personally to each other. One of them, his name is David, and he has an interesting company. The company purchases from food processors the seeds of certain kinds of berries. When you make juice, there's a lot of seeds left over. So if you have a factory that's making tons of juice every year, then there's a lot of seeds left over. And what these companies do is they put them in a big barrel, and they put the barrel in the freezer, and then when they get tired of keeping them in the freezer, this is a big freezer, most of the companies in the United States, they take those barrels to a garbage disposal and throw it away. It's crazy. So my friend thought that was pretty interesting, and you'll really appreciate this in the back. He was an MBA student at the time, and this was his project, because he thought this would be a good idea. So he started researching this thing, and it turned into a company that's only 3 employees right now, but it's going, and I think it's going to turn into a big company. So by the way, he buys the seeds, he processes them, mostly grinding, and they turn into powders of various sizes. And guess who buys the powders? Cosmetic companies for skin creams, and also certain kinds of food products like energy bars really like these powders. So the other guy, there's 2 guys, so I'm introducing the 2. The other guy is 65 years old. The first one, David, he's about 28 or 30 maybe. So Tony, the other guy, is 65 years old. Tony has a company, it's a food processing company. I would say Tony's company is doing sales of about $6 million a year right now. Tony's 65, his son is 42 years old, the son's running the company pretty much. Tony comes in and puts his feet on the desk, and he doesn't have much to do there anymore. So he's kind of bored. Smart, but bored. So I introduced these 2 guys to each other. I thought maybe Tony would give David some advice. Well, they kind of became friends, and they'd have coffee together in the morning every month. And next thing I knew, David sold 16% of his company to Tony. Tony invested. I couldn't be happier. I mean, that's a wonderful thing to have been. It makes me feel really wonderful that I'm really happy that I introduced them. Then David calls me and he says, "You're not going to believe this, but Tony found some equipment for us through his connections in the food manufacturing business that I couldn't find, and not only that, he got me a really good deal." It's a true story. So, David's really happy with me. And with Tony. And then Tony has given David some advice on how to be ready to prepare for food inspectors from the government who come to inspect food processing plants. And a couple of weeks ago, before I left on my trip to come to the Gulf, Tony, the 65-year-old, introduced David, the 30-year-old, to a purchasing agent that David really wanted to meet. So, which investor do you take? David, thanks to the introduction that I made, has an investor who has invested, given him good advice, sold him some equipment at a really good price, and introduced him to people he wanted to meet. Now that is a good investor. And those are the kinds of people that you want to have involved in your company. And the same is true for lenders. It's wonderful if you're borrowing from a bank, if the banker that you are dealing with maybe can do a little more for you than collect your payments every month. Maybe they can introduce you to some people. Sources of funding. It's a real simple one, isn't it? One line. Find investors and lenders who can give you more than money. So, ratios. We're going to come to ratios now. Ratios, I'm sure you all remember them well from your classes. I wish your mathematics teacher was here to hear me talking about how wonderful ratios are. But they're not just for classrooms, ratios. They have lots of uses. For us at Starbucks, especially in the first years, ratios help me organize my thinking about things, because a ratio is a relationship, and I'll talk about that in a minute. They help me communicate with people that were working for me or others, and they enabled us to manage our company better. You wouldn't think that ratios could do that. But those are pretty big advantages. And ratios are not just for classrooms. Here's a fact. Where I live, the business owners that have experience usually talk in ratios. And I'll tell you what that is in a minute. And the inexperienced people talk in dollars and pounds and units. They don't speak in ratios. So let's answer the first question. Can a ratio organize your thinking? Yeah, it really does. Because when you start to say, how much more of this do we have than that? There's some background work that goes on in your brain, and the information gets organized in a new way. It's unconscious. And you are forced to suddenly understand the relationship that you didn't really understand before. So I think it really organizes your thinking. And can they enable you to communicate? Sure, I'll give you a couple of examples. In the coffee business, I might say, we're selling 1,000 kilograms more of coffee each week now than we were selling last month. 1,000 kilograms more per week. Well, the trouble with that is that it doesn't really mean anything. It just means you're selling a little more coffee. But it would be more interesting to the person you're talking to if you said, sales are up 6% per week. Now you understand the relationship. It's 1,000 pounds, but it's 6% more than you were selling. So is 1,000 pounds a lot? Well, 6% is a nice increase in sales, isn't it? But it's not 50%. So what it means, it turns out that 1,000 pounds per week meant your sales were up a little bit. And you can get that message across by using the percentage, which is a kind of ratio, and just saying 6%. Here's another one. Maybe you're trying to explain to your team for your company, if it's a coffee company, that Colombian coffee is outselling coffee from Tanzania 4-to-1. That's a ratio, 4-to-1. Colombia is outselling Tanzania 4-to-1. It's just easier to understand than if you told them how many pounds of each you were selling. It takes too long to get that out. So did ratios help the three Starbucks founders manage their company better in the 1970s? I would say yes. So here's another example from the coffee business. Some of you may know this. Green coffee is those little green beans before it's roasted. When you put it in the roaster, it's a big machine that goes round and round, it's hot in there. When you put it in the roaster, some of the weight of the green coffee, which is moisture, goes right up through the chimney and out into the atmosphere. And you paid for that moisture when you bought the green coffee, and it's gone. So it's an important thing to be aware of in the coffee business. We call it shrinkage, the amount that the coffee loses in weight. So let me give you a concrete example. You put 40 kilograms of coffee into the roaster, you roast it, say 14 minutes for a dark roast, and you open the door and your coffee comes out, and guess what? It weighs 36 kilos. You put 40 in, 36 came out, because as it turns out, this is a rough average, about 10% of the weight of the coffee is lost. So I just told you this story, right? And it took way too long to tell it to you. I could have said, hey, did you know that there's a 10% weight loss when you roast coffee? And that would be the end of the story, and you would understand what I'm talking about. So when I say ratios are a great way to communicate and a great way to manage a company, I'm not kidding. I wanted to show you a short